And no clickbait titles when this video goes live. Someone. I knew this was a bad idea. This is why I wanted like the article to just be an.
So let's get straight into it. Last time we spoke, you went after the ulama. Now you're going after the Muslim Muslim influences. You're
a bad influence on
my
me,
bad influence.
on me, Salman. Yeah, there we go. Haha, pun. Yeah. I don't think this is about going after anyone. I think this is about what we're seeing happening to our communities, what's happening with Islam itself as the faith that we collectively practice, and what it means to be a Muslim living in the UK. I think that's what really drives so many of these things that I'm thinking about, why I write about them, why I keep journals about these things when things happen in the community space. I like to just generally, I like write to myself about it because I'm trying to understand better what I'm seeing, how I'm interacting with it, and how I feel like I should be responding to it as well. And so I think that's the motivation always, which is for me to better understand what's happening in the community that I'm part of myself in so many ways.
Yeah, I mean, writing to yourself is less frowned upon than talking to yourself. But what was this something that stimulated? Was it like a slow growth of stuff that annoys you?
Yeah,
I had a list of those as well. Or was it like, you know what? Now's the last straw or something, or was this something happen or?
I don't think it was anything in particular this time that anyone had specifically done. I think this has been something I've been thinking about a lot for a very long time. People from all walks of life from the community coming to me, talking to me about these things, either complaining about them or worrying about them. We're all online consumers in so many ways, but we're also within the community as well. And when you're interacting with your community, and also when you have children as well, who are subject to these online behaviors, you then have to worry about how things that are happening at a certain level are percolating down into the rest of the community, into the screens that your own children are viewing. And so, I think we're all affected by this stuff, which is why we have to have a response to it. We have to be thinking it through carefully. And so, this, I mean, really, I think probably more so than anything else, it's having worked with a group of young, Muslim activists who are being extremely brave at this time, who are sacrificing themselves and their lives and their futures for the sake of defending the Palestinian people. I think regularly meeting with them almost, kind of week by week basis and seeing their struggle and their suffering, it kind of created this even more manifest distinction between these like culture war debates that are taking place online and, new forms of activism that we're seeing emerging that are much more on the ground. And so I think that kind of starkness really brought it home for me that this is something maybe to talk about now.
Okay, so before we kind of go into details and tangents and stuff, what's let's lay out the crux of the concern, the argument. So a lot of people might not have read the article.
Yeah, so I guess
and this is part of we might want to mention that you wanted to release it as an article first, let it percolate, I think your word was, and then discuss it in other ways. So just let's summarize it and then we'll push back a bit and have maybe a convo about it.
Yeah, so ultimately this article that I wrote, this lengthy article, it is quite long. I think it's almost 7,000 words.
6,500, but who's counting?
But who's counting? Right, exactly. It wants to tackle the idea of this specific space of Muslim influence, right? So there are Muslims who have become content creators, who have become influential figures online, whether through ostensibly the notion of Dawah, or just through product placement, or through just doing things like hijab tutorials, right? But they've built a following for themselves that puts them in locus to what Islam itself is, or at least a presentation that they are, speaking in some way on behalf of the religion. Now, what happens is that they might start off in a very, very, very small space. doing fun, like I'm going to pray in public in the middle of a park and see how people react and respond to me, right? Which might not seem like the worst thing in the world. It's interesting. People consume this kind of content. They find it interesting. They find it interesting to see people's reactions. But often those platforms, they go well beyond. They have this mission creep that takes place, where because popularity is increasing, they start talking about things perhaps are outside of their purview, or perhaps they get drawn into the type of community drama in an online space that perhaps isn't befitting dealing with in an online way. But what happens is, because of the way that these platforms work and because of the larger culture of modernity and its relationship to social media, there is an element of drama that has to accompany putting out content. If you're spending time as a content creator or an influencer putting content out there, the one thing that the platform itself requires you to do is to make sure that people see it. And so now you are invested in a relationship with these platforms that you require, as a person who's creating this content, for people to see that content. And therefore you have to jump on certain trends, certain patterns, in order to make sure that your presence is known. So there is something about that I think
woven into the
to the very
DNA,
fabric
the
of
logic
the platform itself, right?
I was going to ask, how is this different to anything else in the past? You know, whether it's people standing on a soapbox and shouting, or publishing newsletters like physically, or leaflets, or getting people to come to an event, or whatever throughout history. But I guess it's this automated nature of this electronic, this algorithmic kind of.
It's the automated nature of it. It's also the proliferation of it as well. We're talking about the kind of the numbers that are staggering. You know, people are consuming material in a way and to an extent that's never been seen before. You know, your soapbox guy standing on Edgware Road or at Hyde Park Corner talking about what they're talking about.
Don't be a sinner, be a winner.
Yeah, it's going to have a reach potentially. You know, I remember back in the day, like cassette tapes would be produced by these guys and videotapes and whatever else, and these would be shared around. But it was still limited in its ability to reach certain audiences. Now it's global, and it's instantly global as well. And the ability for people to react and respond is instantly global. So if we think about globalization as the constriction of time and space, right? And even the Prophet ﷺ told us that, you know, as we get closer to the ends of time, distances become shorter and time will become less, right? So this is globalization in effect. What we're looking at is a platform, or a series of platforms that require us, if we're engaged with them, to ensure that we are following the types of patterns that create hostility. I think they're designed to create hostility within the community. They're designed to create drama. They're designed to be
I agree that
antagonistic.
that's what the platforms bias. That's what the platforms want to show you. I just think there's an interesting distinction between what you do / have to do, and what the platform will show to people.
Sure.
Because you could be I completely agree with the concern, and I share that concern. Like we've been talking about for ages about, you know, surveillance capitalism, Shoshana Zuboff, or digital colonialism, or all these types of things. You know, they're really interesting stuff, and how just the tentacles of these tech bros and, you know, the billionaires are kind of going into our conversations, and it's probably listening to us right now and is going to show us an ad for whatever.
Right.
But I'm just wary to try and kind of pinpoint certain things at the same time as help people kind of understand what we're talking about. So your first point was that this influencer culture exists in like a neoliberal logic.
Right.
Yeah. And is that what you mean here by the platforms want to show? Because let's just kind of clarify and maybe take one thread at a time.
Yeah, sure. I mean, you know, as I was saying, that the article is based on three premises, and the first of these premises is that there is a market, okay, and that market requires a certain type of engagement, right? So yes, you can engage with it, with these platforms, in a way that's healthy, but in order for you to build your profile, you have to engage with it in ways that are naturally built to be unhealthy. Okay,
By
that is the
design.
design. That is the design of the platform itself. You have to increase likes. You have to increase subscribers. That's why you'll see in so many kind of YouTube podcast platforms or whatever else, you know, press like, hit the subscriber link, right? How many times do we see that? Why? Because you're trying to do what? You're trying to build the platform in order to generate more interest, which generates more likes. There is something about that relationship, okay, that takes out the element of
Ikhlas?
ikhlas and barakah, right? And that's the concern here right now. And it was really interesting. Literally yesterday, I was reading Surah Hud, and in it is a procession of Anbiya speaking to their people, one after the other. And one of the things that they constantly say to their people, right, from whether it's Hud alayhi salam, Saleh, Nuh alayhi salam, any of these people, right, they're always saying the same thing when they're giving the message of Tawheed, that I am not materially gaining. Exactly. I'm not personally benefiting. I'm not gaining anything in my delivery of this message. Right? So in fact, actually the Anbiya are telling us that in the call itself, if you are in the space of da'wah, the one thing that you don't want to impact upon the call, right? They're actually showing that there's no conflict of interest here. If we want to like narrow it down to what it is that they're saying, that there's no conflict of interest that I have between the message that I'm giving, right, and my own personal material interests. That actually I'm not benefiting from delivering this to you in any way, shape, form, or manner. Now, what the platforms are saying to us is that you have a message that you want to deliver, that you want to give out to the world. But in order to do that, you have to build your profile according to the culture that we have developed of building your profile, right? And so, like, for example, even myself now, like, I'm trying to think a bit more clearly about how it is that I'm using certain platforms like Instagram. So, for instance, I'm now not using hashtags, because the whole idea of the hashtag itself, right, is when you do the post and you have the hashtags, it generates interest based on those hashtags in the type of content that you're producing. Because what you're saying to the world is, I have something really important to say. I want to share that thing with you, which is fine. Like, of course, you know, for those of us who are trying to share the message of our work, we're trying to make the work that we're doing apparent to other people. That's what you're trying to do. But this idea of like, okay, is it possible for my message to reach the hearts that it's supposed to reach, okay, without having to delve into every single element and aspect of the way that content creation works? Can I limit myself and rely on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to say that, you know, actually this is going to reach whoever it's going to reach, and the barakah is in that, and if people accept that message, then they accept that message, and if they don't, they don't. Now, somebody might turn around and of course have critiques of even posting in the first place, and I think that's absolutely fine, and it's something that we should be thinking about. And of course we should also be thinking about what it looks like to have our own platforms that are divested from these types of things. You know, I know like organizations like News Corp are trying to develop alternatives and kind of make them available to other people that don't necessarily get into this whole kind of dodgy area of, you know, ultimately what could potentially come down to self-worship. Right, this idea that that this message exists because of who you are and what you are saying, and all of the dopamine hits that come along with that.
So from that angle, this is nothing new then.
Of course,
there's always been the problem with ikhlas and the kind of questioning that we should do to ourselves, and there's you know lots of things that we need to think about when it comes to that just that whole phenomenon of ikhlas and sincerity and insincerity and showing off and riya and sum'ah and stuff. I think, however, might be a bit late to the game with a lot of these mainstream platforms, because they have changed recently quite a lot in terms of, it used to be about subscribers and profile and stuff like that, but when TikTok came onto the scene, it kind of completely threw everything up in the air. And now, because I speak to content creators
I'm
and
not on
organization
TikTok,
and
so I
stuff,
actually know how idea how
I
it
think
works.
I am as well, but I don't use it much. But basically, it introduced an element of, we'll tell you what to watch. It doesn't matter who you liked or who you subscribe to. So the subscriber, the value of the subscriber, algorithmically kind of really went down, and when all the other kind of platforms kind of followed suit, it's more now purely a, an ego thing, not purely, but far more than it used to be. Before, it used to matter. Like if you subscribe to XYZ channel, you'd be actually shown more of that stuff. Now, and with the line in line with the strengthening of these platforms in the paradigm of surveillance capitalism, they're showing you things that they think you're going to like, right? Which is, and the crux of surveillance capitalism itself is to be able to predict future human behavior more and more accurately. So it knows that you're going to like this thing if it flashes up into you in front of you.
So you become the product, right?
Yeah,
That's
you're
what
you're
says.
You're being extracted for raw materials for, keeping the
Exactly.
machine going and predicting human behavior. But that means the ikhlas factor. So it is possible to be a successful content creator and not worry about your likes, your numbers, your shares. But then again, how do you do that? It's still the platform still favors and shows you the content of people / creators that keep you glued to the screen,
right,
and make you watch stuff. Now that's not an ikhlas thing anymore necessarily. The ikhlas thing is the numbers, and it's all about me. I guess the next stage now we can move on. Now that that is the case, anyway, that in order to succeed, you don't need necessarily likes and adulation and subscribers and stuff and fans. You need people's eyeballs.
right.
Now that presents a whole other kettle of fish with more dangerous, maybe, or not, a different type of danger to the ikhlas thing, right? Because now, if I want to post something, I know that if I start refuting someone, it's gonna go viral. If I caught controversy,
Right. I mean, I do want to get into that, but I think there's an element still to the marketization that we have to deal with, which is this element of what it means for. Okay, so the person themselves who's online, that's one thing. They've got a following. They built a following for themselves. But what is our relationship then with these people who have risen to fame, to a celebrity status within the community, and then for us to then say, well, we want to ensure that young people, that musallis still come to the mosque, that we remain relevant. These people are attracting attention. We should invite them to the masjid in order to make sure that we can fill a hall, right? For me, this is equally, if not perhaps in some ways more worrying than the original issue itself, right? The original issue, it's in the online space, but you can still build community through your masjid. You can still build community in your local area in different ways. But what happens is that when we collapse the two worlds together by inviting those people into those spaces then and saying, this is a really important person for you to come and listen to, but really only they're important because of how much controversy they attract, but also how they become relatable to an audience that wants this type of content itself, right? That wants this type of influencer-based content, but it has like further ramifications, because you have these so-called like Islamic events that are being organized where you have like VIP seating, where you can pay more to get different types of access to these speakers, to these type of content creators and influencers. And so what we're saying actually is that within that whole neoliberal market, that there are other forms of markets that are being created where you get to get closer access to Islamic knowledge, or what's being presented as Islamic knowledge, if you have the right funds and the means to do so, right?
You know, we do VIP seats at our events as well.
Do you?
But they're the same price. Well, what we call VIP is just when you invite someone. Like, I'll just give you a VIP ticket. But you don't have to, you don't pay more or anything like that. Is that all right?
I don't know. I mean, I think we.
It's not about access, really. It's about how close you are to the stage and all that kind of stuff.
Well, that is interesting, right? How close you are to the stage, because how close you are to the stage. What we're talking about here is how much access you have to that Islamic knowledge, right? The people who sit closer usually get to speak to the speaker sooner after the talk has ended, right? We know that's generally how it works. So in fact,
it's the same price though.
And that's fine. I mean, but I've actually seen different.
I'm just thinking.
I'm not like critiquing you here.
I'm trying to two things: learn for ourselves, benefit, and also have some Hadoukens that I can in the next meeting when we're planning events. Like, remember this? Asim Qureshi said that.
Yeah. But honestly, I've seen it. I've seen that different pricing ticket. Okay, and what does that effectively do? It creates like these different stratifications of, Muslims with wealth and Muslims who don't have wealth. Okay, and what does that mean in terms of how they then access knowledge and who doesn't get to access knowledge and who gets to access areas of like meeting people and who doesn't? Not that, we should be, kind of putting these people on a pedestal in the first place, but I think all of that creates a culture. But then what happens when these content creators and influencers start marketing brands and products, right? You became famous.
Like the hell with that in that tea advert.
That's an inside joke, yeah. But like,
put it on the screen.
Yeah, put it on the screen. You'll enjoy that, right? But okay, you've become famous because of a closeness to Allah Subhanahu wa Taala that you have, because you are producing content that people, when they look at you and watch you, they feel like they come closer to Allah Subhanahu wa Taala in some way. But now what you're saying is that, okay, I have all of these millions of followers of people who enjoy my content and whatever else. So now I'm going to work with a brand to produce a perfume or a beard oil or something that I can then sell, okay, as part of the market that I've now entered into. Now, some people say, well, this is the world of content creators. This is how they generate wealth for themselves. But here's the thing, and this comes back to what I mentioned about Surah Hud, right? Is your giving of the message now conflicted by the fact that you've entered the marketplace as a producer of a product whose value is not necessarily in how good that product is? Maybe the product is amazing. Maybe it's the best product that ever existed. But people are looking at that product because of you as somebody who delivers the message of Islam itself, or at least portends to. And therefore, there is potentially a conflict of interest here, where your supposed closeness to Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala is now being leveraged in order to sell something to the market.
So is that specific then, that issue is specific for people that maybe market themselves, if there are any like that, as some kind of holy man or, righteous person, or because there are people like that, like we'll mention obviously any names or anything, people that kind of give the impression that they're close to Allah and so forth. But I think so. There's a whole variety, right? There's on the other end there's like just a Muslim artist who's just expressing himself or herself. They have a skill. They wanna show people that skill or whatever. Hijab, whether it's a hijab thing or like a travel vlogger or a food or a chef or something, And I feel we need to allow space for that to be nurtured. People to express themselves in as an artist, as a creative person. And then on the other end of the spectrum, so I'm assuming that's not an issue there for you.
I mean, I think it just depends on how your platform began in the first place, right? So if your platform began giving nasiha and giving guidance and trying to help people come closer to the deen in some way, right? Then I think that at some point potentially, and this might apply to even people who started off doing, for example, hijab tutorials, right? For young sisters who, want to get into starting to wear the hijab and whatever else, but then you kind of shift into this whole like space of marketing your own hijabs, right? or marketing modest wear. But then that can become problematic if that entire market then delves into, well, actually, I now have a platform, I have all of these subscribers, I have all these likes. I actually want to expand into some things that perhaps are potentially not as halal as what you started off doing, because it's you have to follow markets, right? And the way that
Seems
markets
like
operate,
a slippery slope
it's
fantasy world.
potentially a slippery slope, right? And that's the problem. So my problem is that if you start off in the space of your connection to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right, and wanting to help be part of a global movement of expressing Islam in the public space, then to profit from that, I think, is a conflict of
So
interest.
profiting based on, or profiting from an audience built off the back of calling people to Allah or connecting people something to Allah.
I think that's a conflict
There's
of
some
interest.
holiness
Yeah.
attached to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the symbols of Islam that should be divorced from the profit motive.
I think so.
Yeah.
I think it produces a conflict of interest, which is problematic. If you start in the space purely as somebody who is marketing a product, I think that's very, very, very different. But then, like, what happens is that for those who do start off marketing a product, what they do is that they look at these Muslim influencers and say, oh, they're celebrities in this space, let's get them to market our product. I'm sorry, but if your entire shtick was the fact that you were a troublesome young man in your youth and you want to help guide young people as to why it's not good to live that road life or to be a troublesome person, right? Then that's your domain. Why are you now trying to sell me a product about my health? Right? What has that got? What is your message, your initial message that you entered into the scene with, got to do with me now seeing an advert of you saying, take this vitamin, take this supplement, because it's going to be good for your health? Now, I think for me...
Don't buy it.
Sorry?
Don't buy
That's
it.
fine. I mean, like, I don't actually buy
I don't know who you're talking about, by the way.
Yeah,
so
that's
I can,
fine. But
if you are, whoever you are, you're listening, then
right.
I have no clue here.
But the point that I'm making is that what is this doing to us? And what does it say about these spaces and how people enter into these spaces and how they remain in these spaces as well? That's the point, right? It's about this conflict of interest. But it's about, as Muslims, us not having the ability to see beyond what these platforms are trying to create and generate and who they're trying to make us into as well.
Yeah.
And what it's doing to us in terms of the way that we teach the religion and how we absorb the religion, right? Like you and I, had very similar upbringings in terms of
but many years apart.
Many years apart, of course, much younger than me. But in terms of the way that we receive tarbiyah, right? Our teachers are people we would spend time with, that if they told us to read Quran, it's only because we saw them reading more Quran than us. If they told us to wake up for tahajjud when we were with them at night time, and they had told us to wake up for tahajjud, when we arrived for tahajjud, they were already there before us, right? People who, when they said, like, have tawakkul on Allah, we saw them having tawakkul in so many different ways. Like the practice of Islam was never devoid from the teaching of Islam. And that we never saw them profiteering from their teaching of us. Like, I've never seen with any of my teachers, the people that I admire and respect, I've never seen this element of profiteering in my life. And now we have a whole generation who are learning their religion through online spaces, who are also being subject to the marketplace of what comes with these people. And that's one of the key issues.
Well, Karen, after a few words from these sponsors.
Shameless.
Speaking of shameless, you know what's really important? This new Islamic drain cleaner that I discovered. If you want your kitchen spotless and your dishes are piled, I'm just kidding. So it depends on. Okay,
I think this was a bad idea. This is why I wanted, like, the article to just be an article, and let people read the article, even if it's like ridiculously long.
And they are, and they will be, inshallah, reading, and they are reading, alhamdulillah.
Yeah.
So that's clear to me, okay, in terms of look, you want people to practice what they preach, not have a conflict of interest and so forth. And the example you mentioned of all those prophets, they again and again they said, we don't want any, we're not asking for any payment from you, we're not asking for any payment, we're not asking for any ajr from you. In ajriya illa ilallah, you know. My payment, my reward is only from Allah. But that's the ideal we should strive for, right?
Right.
And if someone falls short of an ideal, there's sometimes it's okay, this is bad, you have to, and sometimes it's okay, they just missed a high bar that we should all kind of aim for. And I think we need to be wary not to be too harsh with individuals, but as you're doing rightly, so you know, comment as towards this trend not going too far in just completely destroying the Dawah scene. Because if you, I don't know if you know have relatives like this, but a few of my relatives, you know, they're critical of back home kind of the Malvis and stuff like that, precisely because of this perception that they're profiting, that they're you know, not over here, but like in Pakistan, India, maybe you might have a holy person or whatever who's taking money, or it appears that he's taking money and he's, you know, mixing that side of things. So it does have a poisonous effect to the Dawah, to the Islamic propagation of Islam and activism and so forth. But the and it's very useful to have that demarcation, right? That okay, these are people that they're not attaching themselves. They might be Muslim, they are Muslims, and they're proud to be Muslims and so forth. And when the call of duty comes, they speak up for the issues of justice and so forth. That's the very
Do they?
Yeah, but we need people like that, right?
But
I'm thinking of.
But that's my problem. They don't.
Yeah. So I'm thinking of like the people on the good side end of what we want, right?
Yeah.
So they might be like, I know this brother who's a chef. He does lots of things. Ever since the genocide started, he just started doing like loads of Palestinian recipes and speaking out and saying ceasefire now and condemning the you know, Zionists and so forth. So in my mind, that is the good kind of the end to be on that scale, right?
Sure.
And if that person started marketing, I don't know, cookeryware or whatever.
But did he start off? Was his platform about
just pure
delivering?
Cooking.
So it's not about delivering the message of Islam, right? He is leveraging the position that he has in order to now go beyond his capacity. His capacity, right, was like, I'm going to just like teach people how to cook, right? That's fine.
So no
one's asking him to do anything else, right?
I mean, he's still subject to those forces, algorithmic forces that will, you know, nudge him to do more edgy stuff or whatever. On the other side, it's like a sheikh or something. Yeah, he's elder in the community. We don't want him to start marketing, you know, halal bleach or whatever,
right?
And that's going to diminish his thing. Now the problem is in the middle, and with this, the issue with every slippery slope, where's the demarcations and stuff. A lot of and you mentioned this in the article, a lot of this stuff that looks like Islamic discourse is just repackaged, you know, self-help and wellness and you know, motivational speaker kind of stuff. So what do we do with those people? Are they giving the message of Islam? They're giving a message that is Islamic maybe, but from the perspective of, I'm a psychotherapist who's an expert in whatever and wellness and, you know, meditate and every day and do this and do that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. Like this kind of like culture that ultimately gets reduced to some form of like self-worship, which is just about you as an individual and nothing else, and your happiness is all that matters. And of course it is a massive problem online. And of course it is curated in the same way, exactly like those who are doing Dawah. You are making an intervention into this Muslim, especially we're talking about Muslim ones here, right? People who are using their Muslimness as a way of leveraging what they believe is the way that people should be living their lives. Okay, of course, that is a massive, massive issue, because what happens because it kind of ingrains this individualism that, you know, is a centerpiece of liberalism, right? This idea that we as individuals, right, our individual happiness is the thing that trumps all else. And they forget that actually, like, the Quran does not give us that idea. That actually, what the Quran teaches us, actually, that yes, we should live a good life, but that good life is going to be tested. That, you know, we are going to be tested like those people before us were tested, and we'll be tested like the prophets before us were tested. And we don't know what that test looks like. Sometimes it can look like extreme wealth, but complete unhappiness at home, right? Sometimes it can look like political repression, but your family structure, your friend structure is completely content with what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has determined for you. We don't know what that thing looks like, but we know that it will come. And this idea that somehow there is a pro forma version of living your best life, this is a nonsense. But
so
again,
that is, I guess, now category 2, where it's not the ikhlas issue that we're highlighting. It's the fact that these platforms may nudge the Muslim influencer, and do, into talking about things that will get views, that will make money for the platforms, that will sell them advertising, that will get them raw materials from more and more people. But in doing so, you're accidentally pushing out anti-Islamic messaging.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, we see a lot of that online, and some of it is completely, you know, outside of the ethics of the Quran. We see it constantly, consistently.
But again, I would differentiate. Can we differentiate in some examples between things that are outright against Islam and things that are just, you know, not what we expect from a high moral, ethical, you know, standard of a Muslim? Do you get what I mean?
Yeah, of course.
As we do with
our everyday lives, right? As we do with the kind of conversations that we're having with loved ones and whoever, people that we see fall short, right? But it's also about how we talk to one another in the online space as well. And that's part of the problem, the way in which there is a drama economy that comes with people responding and reacting to one another. You know, I write in the article about, you know, a specific moment where a sister that we know very well from London, who has made massive contributions to our community, who's considered to be one of the most respected sisters in the UK community scene. And, you know, we saw some brothers, you know, tearing into her as if she had committed like some gross crime against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself. I mean, you know, having watched the original video, you know, for me, like, what I saw was people talking a lot about their personal feelings and how they've been personally affected by certain things that they've seen in their lives. They weren't, you know, giving any fatwa. They were not, you know, telling people how to specifically live their lives, what a hukam is on any particular issue, but just saying that this is how we have experienced this thing, or this is how we've seen other people experience the topic that they were speaking about. And sometimes you need to have a little bit of breathing space for that type of content too. Okay, that just allows people to say, okay, there are these experiences that sometimes we don't see as a community, because of the way that our community is designed, that certain narratives are privileged over others, that there aren't spaces for people to speak about certain things. But as long as we accept that content for what it is, which is, this is people are talking about an issue that they see. It doesn't mean anything beyond the anecdotal evidence that they're giving, right? It doesn't mean anything beyond that, but it's still something from their experience that we can learn from and ask ourselves questions. Okay, well, what does this mean for us as a society? Now, what happens instead, that becomes the point of conflict itself. So unless you take that video down and that content down and shut it down completely, right, that somehow there's going to be some great fitna or facade that's happening on the earth. And I don't think that's necessarily the case. You know, but what I'm much more worried about is the ways in which the influencer is self-censored, or self-censors or limits themselves by virtue of their very platform. Now, all of us are pro-Palestine, right? All of us are pro-Palestine, inshallah. We're in that space. But there are, during a genocide, there are degrees to which people speak about certain things. And what I've seen from these influencers, from the ones that have massive platforms, is that there is an upper limit to what they are willing to say. And here is the reason. Because they're worried about two things. Shadow bans, and they're worried about their ability to physically travel. Right? Those are the two main issues that have come up again and again and again. That if I say certain things, my content will not be received by the people who need it. For me, I think there is no more destructive narrative than this within that space. I think that this, I believe, is an anti-Tawheed understanding of what it means to be in the Dawah scene. That somehow you believe that your platform is more significant than the giving of the message. Now, some people will say to me that, oh, well, you have to be pragmatic in these times, right? My view is that the larger your following, the greater your burden. If you have a large following, then you have a burden to use that following in order to speak truth. And limiting yourself by having low ambitions for what you can and should be saying, I think is problematic.
But must every truth be spoken?
I think every truth should be spoken as much as you're possibly able to say it, right? So some people are in the space where they're willing to take more risks than others, and that's fine. Not everybody has to take those same risks. But there is this space of what is legally possible, right? I think every single person has to exhaust themselves in the space of what is legally possible. But what's happened is because of this idea of risk, right, which is kind of really been popularized first in banking before anywhere else, but because everything is neoliberal, everything becomes a market, and therefore everything carries now a risk assessment. Now, risk assessments, people always say to me, oh, our lawyers have advised us we can't talk about X, Y, or Z, right? I'm sorry, brother, but I've been studying the war on terror for 25 years. There is not a single lawyer that you know who could advise you better on these issues than I can, right? Without sounding arrogant about it. But we know what we're talking about. The lawyer, what they're doing to you is they're saying, in their estimation, the way that you evade any kind of scrutiny by the state is by staying below a certain line in terms of your public rhetoric and narrative.
Yeah.
Now, the space of what is legally possible is much higher. The ceiling is much higher than the place that you are sitting at right now. But your lawyers have advised you to stay down here, right? This...
So I'm saying the guy in the Krispy Kreme shop is advising me I eat a donut.
Yeah, I mean, kind of, he's conflicted, right, by his due diligence to you. You are his client. He feels a sense of responsibility towards you. What he wants to do is make sure that the Charity Commission never sends you a letter. But what he does in the course of doing that is to minimize the role that you could possibly play within wider society because of his professional duty towards you.
And the unintended consequence is that makes everyone more likely to get letters down the road from the Charity Commission.
Of course, and they do. And they always do.
Yeah.
And they always do. Now they're getting their letters because of their
and
charity
the bar is going lower and lower and lower for that.
Exactly. Whereas if you had kept it at a very, very robust level from the very first, from the very first instance, then you could have challenged them. And that's why I always talk about, like, a Masjid like Lewisham Islamic Center, which, when you see the way that they respond to the Charity Commission, and this is a masjid that its press releases, mashallah, are like some of the best press releases you will ever see on a whole range of issues that affect not just the Muslim community in the UK, but this ummah, right? They are extremely robust. They do their due diligence, but they stay within the boundaries of what is legally acceptable. But they maintain it at the ceiling of what it is, not having low ambitions for themselves. And that is why their community thrives so much in a way that we haven't seen with many other communities.
Yeah, mashallah. I think Timothy Snyder, in his book that you recommended once, 20 Lessons from Tyranny from 20th Century, he said one of the lessons is don't volunteer. What was it? Don't volunteer cooperation or obedience or acquiescence, something like
Right,
this.
absolutely.
So I'm fully sympathetic to that argument from a risk perspective that you're putting out there. Don't self-censor because of risk and fear and so forth. That, 100% with you. I would even be more harsh, use more harsh language than you have, But what about other areas where someone might just say, what is my saying free Palestine going to millions of people that already know, that already agree with me? What is that going? Do you see that's where the argument becomes a bit more tricky for me to refute personally.
I don't think it is difficult to refute. What is your absence saying about who you are and about what the message is? Because people can see the absence in your narrative. People can see the things that you are speaking about and the things that you aren't speaking about. But here's the thing, what duty of care do you owe to those who are feeding the most violent end of what is taking place? That is the question that's not being asked, right? What is the burden? Because there is a burden. There is a burden that comes with the platform, and whoever you are, you cannot ignore that. If you have 10 million followers, there is a burden for those 10 million people to know what the truth is about a specific matter. And if you are explicitly withholding some of the truth that you believe in, because you are concerned about the impact that it's going to have on you personally in your life or on your platform, then I think there is a conflict here. One conflict that you have to resolve, and one that cannot be simply passed away as this is hikmah, right? Because if we believe la hawla wa la quwwata illa billah, if we believe in the stories of the Anbiya and the Quran, if we believe that Dawah is inextricably linked to the idea that there is no material benefit, that Dawah is about rectifying social ills, that if we accept that Dawah itself is a prophetic kind of calling, then once you are in that space in particular, then the duty to act like the Anbiya is self-executing. That is the example. The Quran is the example. Now,
especially if there's an oppressed group involved here.
Absolutely.
I think that's the key.
Especially if there's an oppressed group.
Because they have a haqq on you as well to use your, just to show them moral support in whatever way you can.
Absolutely.
You can't, take up arms and liberate them, but you can use your voice, you can use your social media account or whatever.
Right. I mean, at the very minimum, you should be calling for their right to arms, at the very least, right? Like if we think about, the ayah in Surah An-Nisa, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, what is wrong with you that you do not fight when you hear the mustada'afin, right? Like it's not even a case of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala saying you should, in this circumstance, when there are oppressed people calling out for your help. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is actually taking this to a very, very human level. That there must be something wrong about you.
SubhanAllah.
That when you hear this cry, that you are refusing to get involved in the fight in some shape, form, or manner, right? That you as a human being have now fallen deficient in what it means to be a human being and as a Muslim by virtue of your lack of involvement. Now, like you said, we might say that you can't get involved in the fight itself. But why are you using your voice to condemn the fighters? Why are you...
That is inexcusable. Oh, yeah.
I would go further than it's inexcusable. I would go further than it's inexcusable. And I don't want to say the words that I think it actually is. But to go on public platforms and to condemn the very people who have been suffering for 100 years for taking up their own resistance, I think is possibly one of the worst things that I have seen from people who, should know better.
Inshallah, we can make excuses. Anyone does that they slip up and so forth.
Inshallah.
We're not kind of attacking any individual here, making like a final judgment or anything, but we have to be wary of, that.
And I think they have good
trend.
They have good to share, right? But it's that whole thing about, okay, well, why is the platform so important? Why is your personal safety and security so important? And it shouldn't be. If the message of the Quran is true, right, and you are embodying the message of the Quran and the Sunnah, right, then you should know by now that by inserting yourself into this space, that speaking truth carries potential consequences. Musa alayhi salam knows that Fir'aun and his people, might harm him and Harun alayhi salam. That's why they respond in Surah Taha to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when they're told to go and free the children of Israel. He says that we are afraid of what Fir'aun and his people will do to us. It is okay to understand that it's a scary world, but it's not okay to back away from it. It's not okay to leave the message once you are being guided towards it. And that's the other element of it, that once you're in this space, once Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chose you to be in this space, then there is no opportunity to back away from it except to carry it forward and through.
So it seems that there's an implicit acceptance or encouragement from your words that there should be Muslims in the online influencer space, but they should be adhering to a certain code or a certain, be wary of these pitfalls and so forth. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, and that they should really, really have a group of scholars and elders around them that are helping to guide them, that are holding the diseases of the heart that we all suffer from, all of us, to account. There's not a single one of us who doesn't suffer from the uyub nafs, like we do, because that is what it means to be a human being and a Muslim in the world. I always think about that shaitan that's speaking to Imam Ahmad at the end of his life, saying to him, you defeated me, right? Trying to make him have some small level of kibr right until the last moment, right? We have to be conscious and aware of that. But instead what we have is Muslims who are talking about, the importance of polygynous marriages, right? And talking about the importance of I don't know, their red pill narratives or whatever else, and explicitly lying in public spaces, on online platforms, on their channels, explicitly lying, making up stories, or kind of changing stories in order to what? In order to hurt Muslim women so it attracts more views and outrage. They're doing this explicitly, and they've admitted, and I've seen them on podcasts admitting to the fact that they have changed stories and that they have worded the titles of their videos in certain ways, specifically to garner attention and to create controversy so it attracts more attention to their message. How is this prophetic? How is this in any shape, form, or manner something that any of the Anbiya or the Prophet ﷺ would have done? Quite frankly, it is beyond disgraceful. And I think people like that should be completely ousted from any kind of online space. They should never be platformed in any way. They should never be given any attention whatsoever. They should literally be exiled from the online space until they work on themselves, until they've gone through a process with a series of ulama that can help them, and then maybe in the future at some point. And that comes to the point about Andrew Tate that I mentioned, right?
So when it comes to lying, we've all had this. There's always this dichotomy between. So you're mentioning, okay, somebody basically lied on a title or a thumbnail of a video or something like that, or a title of a post. That's okay. The realm of clickbait now, right? But I also have this notion called legit bait.
Okay. This is your notion.
I stole it from I'm really kind of interested in science communicator YouTube channels and stuff like that.
Okay.
I watch a lot of science, engineering, maths kind of videos, and they have this. It's like they have this issue that they've overcome,
Okay.
right? Because a lot of maths and engineering is really boring, right? But you need, in this market, you need to have titles, thumbnails, and presenting stuff in an interesting way that will get people to click. But not just any people who you think will actually, intended audience, or people who are interested in that kind of stuff.
Okay.
So,
can you give me an example of legit bait?
So clickbait is when it's something wrong, around something, you're lying about something or misleading, right? Legit bait is when you actually look at your message, your video, whatever, and you think, what am I talking about? Okay, and what is a good curiosity kind of piquing way to attract people who might be interested in that thing to put two and two together, right? And I admit YouTube is specific. My knowledge about this is more in the YouTube area rather than other stuff. So other platforms might have another kind of thing, but so I feel it's important for us to recognize this, because we also have to do due diligence and not be lazy. Sometimes I dress up. We naturally we're not like very sensational razzmatazz and stuff, but sometimes it's because we're just lazy. Right? If you have a message, you really want to give it, do it with ihsan, because part of ilmul bayan, of balagha, is 1/4 of it, I think, as a science, is who are you talking to.
Right.
You have to tailor your kalam, your discourse to the right audience.
Right.
Okay. So so legit bait would be, for example, if I think about the last science related video I saw, why is there anything? Okay, that's just an example. It's talking about the first few moments, fraction of a second after the Big Bang, where we think there should be equal parts of antimatter and matter, and they annihilate each other. So why is there something left over? If I just went into the video, that would be boring, right? Or I wouldn't know that I'm interested in this thing. So do you get what I mean? So that's an example of legit bait.
Right.
So there's
something that piques your curiosity, as opposed to lying specifically to garner attention, right? And
so I think lying and truth is a clear barometer, right? Of, are you lying to get people to click?
So there's two elements, right? There's one element of it which is lying, which is to deceive people about the content of what's inside the video itself, right? Or to change a story so that it attracts people to come to that video. But there's the other element of which is specifically that there are parts of the community, okay, that feel hurt or feel that they are traumatized by certain narratives, and you lean into their trauma in order to attract attention to your video. I find that despicable, personally. That you know explicitly that some people are feeling hurt by a certain topic, by a subject matter, or whatever else. And so instead of like trying to meet them and say, okay, you feel hurt by X, Y, or Z phenomenon that's taking place, can I do a video that like helps to understand that hurt that you're feeling, and maybe provide like a counterpoint to it that you might think about in terms of the kind of lives that we're living today in the 21st century, and all the problems with modernity that I try and address at the end of the article. But they don't do that. Instead, what they do is that they say, I want to lean into their trauma, I want to lean into the hurt that they're feeling by effectively capitalizing on that in order to attract attention to my video, and to create then more drama, which will then allow me to enter into further cycles of producing content, right? That's the issue.
So
that you have such little care and regard for your own community, the same community that you belong to, that you would rather hurt them further by being disingenuous, by being clickbaity, by out and out lying, than to actually take their care into your consideration.
Let me again, as a kind of disclaimer, I have no clue what you're talking about in terms of the real examples, and but let's just from what you said, let me push back a bit and say there's an inherent subjectivity that we need to account for. I always give the example of, imagine a baker, right? Someone's waking up early in the morning, baking bread, sending it to people, going home at the end of the day. You can frame this in two very different ways. One is like, look, he's a hardworking guy, he's providing for his family, he's service for the community. Another person could say, look, he's exploiting the hunger of, of people. He's, he's going in the morning, kind of wiping his hands together, excited to extract wealth from the lowest classes of people in society. Do you know what I mean? At the end of the day, only he knows. And then again, a lot of it is intention, right? And maybe it's sometimes a mix of both, right? He wants to increase his prices because he wants nice things, but then he feels, okay, maybe I... So is this not the case? Maybe this is the case here, that in this influencer culture, when they do things that are distasteful, obviously lying aside, lying is a big red flag, but even if they do fall into that as an error, do we not look at them as our brothers have made a mistake, let's think good of them, or they're doing this in order to get a big following and then they can do more of that and stuff? Do you get what I mean?
But that's where I think the intentionality of this is all very, very confusing, right? Because you could read it that way if you wanted to, but let's remember the platform itself is the biggest winner.
So they're also victims of the platform.
Okay, but they're also actors. Okay, and this is the thing that
actually,
people ask me, why am
Zuboff argues we're actually losing our agency.
Right.
We're losing our agency if the thing is, what is my will then?
Yeah, absolutely, she argues that. But people always ask me, why do you always come down harder on scholars and du'at than anyone else, right? And the reason for that is very, very simple.
Payback.
Yeah, payback. I've got nothing to pay them back for. Like, alhamdulillah, they don't cause me any difficulty.
In my wax used to get as a kid.
In my life personally. Although I did, you're right. When I was younger, like the Qari Saab would do all of those things to me, man. Like, stress positions, whatever else. Is that why I'm an anti-torture activist? Oh my God, now it's making sense.
Geneva Convention. Yeah.
I never even thought about that.
You're welcome.
Okay, that's right. Thanks for the therapy session. Here's the thing, right? That the closer you are to Islamic knowledge, right, the more of a burden that you have.
Absolutely.
And so if you portend in the public space to be close to understanding what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's irada is for us on this earth, right, through the Quran and the Sunnah, and you're presenting yourself that way, you are talking about Islamic issues, you are getting involved in the construction of what it means to be Muslim, it means the burden is so much higher. Your akhlaq are a representation of the religion itself then. Okay, because people are looking at you and saying, oh, this is somebody I should follow. You don't have a choice. There is no element now, okay, of your being able to make very, very, very public mistakes on a regular basis and just being like, oh, my bad, that was a faux pas, let's move on. That's not okay. Like, the social media space, especially within the Muslim community, is not here for your trial and error in real time. We don't need to be live streamed your own learning of your faith. So if you're in that space, you have to come prepared to be in that space. And if you're in that space and you're learning on the job, then you are going to make mistakes. And fine, we can be giving and saying, okay, brother made a mistake, maybe we should look past it and whatever else. But what happens when the mistake leaves half of the community, a quarter of the community, reeling for months on end because of something that you said, feeling extreme hurt because of not only things that you said, but the way in which those were internalized by the people, like maybe a younger audience that is watching them, and then they perpetuate that narrative. And I always think about that ayah in Surah An-Nisa, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that Allah does not like the use of bad words, except for one instance. where someone or people have been oppressed. It is the exception to the rule, right? And so if you are creating narratives that oppress others, that harm others, then, you know, there is an element that actually you don't get to make those mistakes in real time, right? And honestly, if it wasn't for the fact that I thought it would be a distraction to the arguments that I'm making, the larger structural critiques that I have of social media, the social media space, and or the influencer space, I probably would have taken names more explicitly. And I know that would have come with a lot of heat and whatever else.
I would have deleted them anyway.
Sorry?
I would have deleted them.
You would have deleted them anyway. All right. There you go. There you go, right? They would have been edited out. But I think what we need to do is, first and foremost, come to grips with the fact that we are all subject to all of these things, as am I. And I try in the article to make that very, very clear. But if you are playing a certain role in this online space, where you make a decision, for instance, to host somebody like Andrew Tate on your platform, he's just become Muslim, right? And what you do is that you say, oh, he's become Muslim, let me give him a platform now to speak about him coming to Islam. And now people like myself get told, well, you know, he's now a Muslim, so all of his sins are wiped away. Of course, I have to accept that. I have to accept that. But does that mean that on day one of his conversion to Islam, that we then propel him within the community into the limelight and say, brother Andrew has now become a Muslim, listen to what he has to say? Does it mean that we have to now engage in that process? Or could we choose to sit back and say, well, hold on a second. This guy was a self-confessed hustler, you know, self-confessed somebody who is involved in all manner of fahisha and so on and so forth, right? Like his own, you know, kind of CV is littered with the things that you should never be as a Muslim. And on day one, you decide, well, you know, it's a good idea that we push this guy forward and introduce him to the whole of the ummah as a Muslim, and whose opinions we should be thinking about. I don't think that's right.
What if he's the one who's getting you seen by others?
What do you mean?
If he's more popular than you are,
Of course.
then you're not the one who's introducing him to others. You're the one who's...
No, but what you're doing, right, is that you're saying, okay, I'm already known in the Muslim space as being a reliable voice of Muslims and Islam, right? He is more popular, for sure. He's got many more followers than some
Someone
of these
could say, if I get him on Islam Trinity, whatever, people know him already, but his fans, maybe mostly non-Muslim, maybe it will get 1,000 people becoming Muslim. What would you say?
Okay, but is that a price worth paying in terms of introducing his narrative to the rest of the community? Remember, on the very first night of his conversion, he had a website where he was sending T-shirts for $100 each that said, like, the fight against Shaitan begins here, or something like that. But this comes back to that whole market economy, right? Which is now instantly what was happening is that his conversion to Islam, okay, was being marketized within that entire infrastructure that has developed. And I think people who saw that, and maybe people didn't see it, maybe that's where you can give them the husna dhan, right? But just anyway, even outside of that, you know what his positions have been up until this point.
Yeah.
Okay, now what you're doing is saying, let's carry on those conversations, but now inside of a different discursive framework,
So
right?
you're
Which
saying
is Islam.
Yeah, the cost is too great.
I think that
the harms outweigh the benefits.
I think in this time in particular, this is not like inviting him to Jimas in the early 90s, right? Okay, at this time,
he wouldn't have made that live.
Yeah, exactly, right. In this time in particular, where people rely on these influences and these platforms so much, I think it does a disservice to our community to not say to him, okay, brother, you became Muslim. We recommend you now disappear from public life for a while. Learn your religion. Read the Quran extensively. Okay? Read tafsir. sit with a scholar who's going to teach you akhlaq, who's going to teach you the manners of what it means, who's going to take you through adab al-mufrad, right? Who's going to take you through various texts, okay? Strengthen your heart with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, okay? Your platform's not going anywhere. And when you come back, then perhaps by then you would have learned your religion to the extent that you can make a positive contribution. Look, I'm not one of these people who says that people are beyond the pale. If that was the case, then Umar ibn al-Khattab, right, would never have become a Muslim. This is a man who converted to Islam on the day he was going to kill the Prophet ﷺ, right? If there is a story in that we can all take hope from, which is that it's never too late for us, for any of us. And so I don't reject people out, completely. But you also have to be conscious and aware and understanding that you have a responsibility to the platforms that you have in order to ensure that you are helping those people themselves, but helping the community at the same time. There's no point putting somebody out like that if what he's going to do is perpetuate harms further into the future.
So I guess when you explain it that way, we have to stand in the possibility that someone else's weighing of the benefits and harms put them on the other side of the yes/no equation. Should we host X or not? Yeah, and that then brings this a binary yes/no decision, where people might have fierce views on either side. It brings it down to a more continuous, nuanced variation of, we agree with your points, but there's this benefit and that benefit and this harm and that harm. And I would never platform him as now, maybe after some period of whatever, rehabilitation, if you want. I don't think he's dying to get on the sometimes anyway, but
that's not the point, though, right? The point is that you wouldn't platform him.
I wouldn't,
right?
But I wouldn't say to those who did, that this is necessarily, some condemnable.
So here's the thing.
That's my personal view.
Because I think the platform conflicts you. The fact that you have a platform, right? A platform that requires attention, I think that in itself conflicts you.
Me personally, or
no,
you?
That space, the platforming space, is conflicted by the fact that it requires attention in order to increase its range, its viewership, and whatever else. And this is why even those platforms, if you are an influencer, I genuinely believe that you should have actually a group of scholars around you that are advising you with all the decisions that you make. Because your platform is not, and this is the thing that people, I think, fail to understand, these platforms are not our own. They are not our own. They belong to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They belong to the ummah. They belong to the community. And if you center yourself and believe that the platform is yours and that you are the mastermind behind the great sound bites and whatever else, then I think you've already lost. If you understand that your voice and everything that you do is purely a projection of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's generosity, that you are permitted to be in a space where he allows you to say something, okay, then I think that changes the dynamic completely. And if that is the case, then you have to understand that having a group of people around you that perhaps are older, perhaps are wiser, perhaps have had different life experiences, I think changes things dramatically.
So I think the question is really, what is your message? Okay? And why are you choosing to make that message? Yeah. If the message itself is something you've determined from a process of just editorial planning or thinking, or your dean is saying X, Y, Z, or something happening is a genuine idea to get this message out, that's very different to, and I think that's how it should be. What's happening, what the platforms are doing is they're making you or pushing you to say, here's your message. Or why don't you talk about this thing instead? Or why don't you talk about that thing? That's why we have a policy. That's why we don't do sometimes stuff goes viral and sometimes it doesn't. And I know if I wanted to keep making stuff go viral, I know how to do it.
Right.
There's like a formula. There's you're just cussing people or whatever.
Right.
Or even
Right.
in a more sanitized way, certain things you could do. A picture of the Kaaba and a nice quote or something that would just go viral, whatever. But
is that right?
yeah, I mean, yeah, it would on some platforms. But what our message is, we have a particular editorially and from a tarbawi kind of lens and mashayikh and so forth. We have these things that we want to push out. We have an agenda. We want to push principles out. And then so we imagine that like a Venn diagram. That's one circle. If we put it out like this on this side, then no one's going to click it. But there's another circle of what people will watch. And the platform wants you to kind of push onto this side. The people will watch things that make them angry, that make them annoyed, that make them hurt, that make them depressed. Right. And we have to be careful, obviously, to let the platform dictate our message. But there's still that. There's still a proper way to
not to let the platform dictate your message.
Yeah, we have to be careful that we don't let the platform dictate our message. Or your message is this much, or actually if you say this bit, then you might get shadow banned or you might get whatever. And naturally we are careful. Like we have a suicide campaign, and we don't use the word suicide in the. We have anti-suicide campaign. Let me make that sure, clear. Before you correct me again, an anti-suicide campaign, and I was like, look, don't use the word suicide because I did a bit of research, and it will come up with an advert or for suicide helpline or something, or reduce the reach and stuff. So I would be lying if I said we don't take into consideration things that will harm the reach arbitrarily. Like if we can say something in another way, I would say it in another way.
But are you doing that to create controversy in any way?
No, that's the thing.
Lie to the community in order to harm them in any way.
Yeah, so that's obviously that.
And this is where the what you've been talking about in terms of having guidelines to me, right, around this whole area is like super important. Like, how do we create those guidelines so that you understand that there are ways of engaging with these platforms that are helpful, that do allow a message to get across, that effectively it's very scientific, right? In terms of its approach to the platform, but what is not doing is not leveraging the community's hurt for the sake of creating controversy. And that is really the one of the key issues I have. But even like this whole space, man, it's so destructive to me. I've got 3 boys, right? Mashallah, the oldest of him 17, the youngest is 11. And we talk a lot about role models in our house, and I talk a lot to them about the role models that I had growing up. The people that were maybe like 9-10 years older than me were people who sacrificed for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They found themselves going to places like Bosnia, Afghanistan, Chechnya, to assist those who are most oppressed in this world. And obviously, like, the global war on terror is this like massive psychic harm that happens to the community, where it self-censors in a way that we've never experienced self-censorship before. And what happens, I think, as a result is people want to feel like, especially in this whole masculine space, they want to feel like men again, but they don't know how. Because one of the ways in which they can relate to those who are most oppressed has been taken away from them. And so what do? They end up kind of going down these entire like red pill routes, this false idea of what masculinity is. They are given low ambition role models in their lives. And it was so interesting for me. I was at a janazah last week of an auntie from the community who, mashallah, was loved by the whole of that South London community. The masjid was packed with people for the janazah, and even at the graveside it was a huge gathering to bury her. She was an amazing woman.
I was there.
You were there. Yeah. And what did you see there? What we saw surrounding her grave were like this kind of like sea of like former mujahideen, of ulama, of people who are not in the online space but have made massive contributions. And I was looking at a lot of them brought their kids with them as well, and their kids are older, they're in their 20s and like teenagers and whatever else. So looking at the kids as well, and those kids are not in any of these online spaces either, but they're all kids that I know are making massive contributions to their communities, and you know, their akhlaq is excellent. You know, whenever I meet them, then, you know, these young men, they have been raised really, really well, mashallah. And I was looking at that generation and thinking to myself, it's so interesting that, we've written this article, we've published this article about this issue. None of those people are here surrounding this grave of this woman who had given so much. But the people that are surrounding her grave are the people who have really sacrificed in this country. And instead, we're treated to like exhibition fights between the far right and, some brothers who, mashallah, are strong and who want to exert their thing. But, this is not the same thing. This is not the same thing as that generation.
So are you saying our wings have been clipped and our ambitions have been...
I think our wings have been clipped, and we have also clipped our wings as well. I think both things have happened at the same time. And so this idea of rijala is presented in these like manicured, sanitized fights with proper rules and proper conditions, with people that in the 80s we used to fight in the streets. I'm sorry to say, but it's not the same thing, right? Like having a fight in a sanitized environment with a skinhead is not the same as a street fight with the NF or the BNP or whoever, as it used to happen, right? And I don't know what the value of this is either. I don't know what it teaches, because imagine, I mean, these brothers, like, from what I can see, they win their fights, right?
I've never seen them, but...
Yeah, no, I mean, from just the little whatever that I've seen, right? But what if they lost? Like, what does that mean? Is this some kind of like hujjah for Islam or something, right? That these things are taking place and that they're winning. But what if they lost? What does it mean for people? Like, do people start having crises of faith because they say somebody that, is putting themselves out there losing a fight? And so I just don't know the value of...
If somebody is a fighter, then it might give the impression or make people feel that the person he's fighting is the enemy, rather than it's just someone he's fighting. It's like a professional. If he's
and perhaps I'm just like this, like grumpy old man.
That's what I was thinking. Maybe we're just back in my day,
Maybe it is that I'm just a grumpy old man. But what I'm thinking about, what I'm trying to think about, is what the idea of manhood that I grew up with, that I was treated to by people who actually sacrificed a great deal, and the way that it is presented now, as this kind of like online contestation, that, it seems strange to me.
So you've reminded me of a few things that I've been thinking about, and the team actually, Islam 20 as well, have been thinking about for a while. That, so you're talking about, okay, there's a proper way to do things online, that we can dictate our own message, tell our own story, instead of being used by some algorithm or some platform. And add to this, during the genocide, my opinion changed of should Muslims even be on these platforms. I was always historically, I was very against kind of these platforms just being there, right? Because we're feeding into it and we're not even knowing. And a few years ago, I wrote an article called AI is making a fifth madhab, right? But it's just because of the way while we're on there, the types of content that dangles in front of you, the type of content that we unknowingly feel that we need to talk about on these platforms. But during the genocide, what changed my opinion was whenever I see the usual, Zionist BS being shared, underneath those posts, you'd get hundreds of people refuting that thing. Okay. Now there's a meta issue of, because they're refuting that thing, it's sending it even more viral, right? Because that's engagement. That's what the platform wants. But in terms of just pure making the message too loud to ignore, I think social media has done that for the Gaza genocide that we didn't have 10 years ago.
I agree. I talk about that in the article. I think it has democratized the traditional media, and taken power away from the traditional media. And that's why we're seeing like generations of young people across the Western world in particular who are rejecting Zionism. And
that's also why we're seeing, tech billionaires and tech bros kind of sweeping in and trying to stem that,
right,
or make their own, the new kind of Murdoch,
right.
Elon Musk.
But I come back to the point though about, okay, fine, and Muslim influencers have played their role in relation to Palestine to some extent. But again, we come back to this point of the ceiling.
It's not the fact that they're influencers. It's the fact that, okay, in our tradition, we don't have this thing called, okay, this clear demarcation that, okay, now you are an Islamic person, you're a da'i, you're a whatever. Ballighu anni walau ayah. Someone would say, Prophet ﷺ said, convey from me, whatever you hear, even if it's an ayah.
Right.
And so a lot of these influencers that you might call influencers or da'is online, it's just average Joe or some uncle who's sharing something, some advice, some kid who's sharing something out online. We don't want to stem that spirit, that zeal for talking about the deen, talking about justice, talking about calling for the good, amr bil ma'ruf and nahy al munkar, condemning the munkar, speaking out for Gaza and these types of things. So in that vein, that's why one of the campaigns that we're working on in the laboratory is to actually empower people. That I'm still, even though I say I changed my opinion, I'm still against telling someone to go on the platform.
Right.
If you're not on it, don't go on it.
Right.
Unless you're like, if someone with huge, immense, one of these mujahideen, right, that would actually people need to hear about, people need to develop a connection to, right? But if you're just some, kid who's never been on, don't go on these things. But if you're there, there needs to be training, a code of conduct, an ethics, a community that you create around you that can advise you. Just this is what one of our next campaigns is, what we're working on. I've told you about this, so I'm gonna get you in and deliver some stuff in part of that campaign. The working name is Digital Ambassadors. Okay, so we want ambassadors of the Deen, ambassadors of justice, ambassadors of the Prophet ﷺ, that will be wary of the economic logic that they're operating in, how to operate within it despite being in it. Okay, how to subvert some of these ceilings, how to stay away from the red line. What are the red lines? Attacking others, capitalizing on oppression. That's something it wasn't on the radar.
Right.
So we're definitely gonna go into more detail later on. I'm gonna tell you right now, like 2 hours in almost. What advice would you give them? But what advice would you give them? Right? Because we do want to, notwithstanding that campaign on the horizon, inshallah, right now, someone's online, okay? I used to say get offline. But now I say, look, you're needed. You're one of the soldiers in the information, in the knowledge war, the battle, right? What practical advice would you kind of close off this discussion with?
I think it's the same advice I'm trying to give my own heart, which is you have to take care of the state of your heart when you're on these spaces. Like that, I think I can't think of anything that is more fundamental and crucial, because they're designed to breed kibr. That's really the bottom line. If there is, I don't think there is a device more shaitani in that sense. Like if we think of the sin of kibr that he's accused of, these outlets are designed in order to increase that in our hearts, that you feel validation through the liking of others, through the sharing of others, and we all become subject to it. I use apps that keep me out of my social media accounts for various points in my day. It's a productivity issue to like make sure that I don't like end up doom scrolling or whatever else, but it's also this element of like you should also be able to go part of your day without wondering about how, how people are reacting and responding to the things that you put out there into the world, right? And we get it wrong sometimes. Sometimes we get too invested in it. Sometimes we get dragged into the quagmire of what is happening in that online space. But I think if you're online and you have been given a platform by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you have to understand, first of all, that it was Allah that gave you that platform, right? That platform is not one of your own generating. There's this whole idea about, oh, I'm a content creator, I created this content is my proprietary right. No, if you are in the space of Islam and the spreading of Islam as a message, then those subscribers, those likes, those follows that you receive are ones that are derived by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to you, and therefore they carry burden. That burden is, the larger your platform, the more responsibility you have to speak. And we see this with so many people who, again, coming back to that whole the Dawah element of all of this, because those are the people that I hold to account at a highest level, that we see the ceiling of what you're willing to say. Like you've talked about Gaza and the genocide, and we see that they're willing to talk about charity and getting involved in charity drives, and all of a sudden you'll see them distributing aid in some foreign country somewhere in order to get aid across to different oppressed peoples. Okay, that stuff is easy. It is the absolute bare minimum. It's like last Ramadan when I heard a speaker saying that, how do you expect Palestinians to get on with their lives if they can't get an education, right? Brother, the question is, how do you expect Palestinians to get on with their lives while they live under occupation? We resist the urge to deal with the occupation because it's uncomfortable for us to know that it's still there. So often when I look at Muslim influencers online, I want to see, okay, what did you guys say about the Riverway Law case for Hamas? You guys are talking about Palestine all the time. This major legal application was put in. What did you guys say about it? When I look at Palestine Action and the Fulton 24, and I look at the Defend Our Juries protests, I'm looking at their content to see whether or not they have been speaking about these issues at all in any shape, form, or manner that is meaningful. And I've actually, I was having this conversation with brothers as we're planning our, with Inside Cage, as we're planning our kind of future events, both inside and outside of Ramadan. And I said to them that I think the time has come when kind of speakers within the Muslim community who are invited to our platform prove their worth to stand on that platform, right? Because I think we give people a pass sometimes to say, oh, they're a good speaker. Okay, mashallah.
For 10 years.
Sorry?
I haven't been invited for a cage talk for 10 years.
I mean, there's still time. There's still time for you, yeah. But
you sued the government. Okay, now you can give a talk. Next time you do it, no.
No. You're always invited, mashallah. How many people can say they took on? It was a Priti Patel at the time, right?
It was Theresa May.
Theresa May, yeah, and gave her a mad black eye, mashallah, which actually benefited all of us, because with your case, Allahumma barak, you weren't just thinking about yourself. The whole time you were thinking about how can we leverage my case to benefit the community further? How can we expose what the government's doing? And it's one of the things Jazakallah khair, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept it from you, is the kind of work we need to see much more of. How are we leveraging the spaces that we're in order to bring about greater khair for those who are most oppressed, right? That's it. You didn't see yourself as a victim in that moment. You see yourself with somebody as an opportunity, as somebody who's being attacked by the government, to leverage that opportunity to do what? To bring about more information and more khair for us as a community so we could fight back against the difficulties that we were facing. Ones that we're still facing today, but you cracked open a window into stuff that we didn't know before. And it was an amazing moment, right? But that's the kind of thing we need much more of, that kind of bravery, that kind of, not putting ourselves first, but putting the needs of the community first at all times. And so inshallah, that's my hope for all of these brothers and sisters who are in this influence space, that inshallah they understand the burden that is attached to being in that space, that it is that having that platform is connected to the tradition of the Anbiya, that it's going to come with difficulty, and that it comes with a responsibility to be truth speakers in the way that, you know, the Quran requires of us. And inshallah, I hope that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you know, kind of forgives us all and makes us better than who we are, especially as we engage in all of these online spaces.
I mean, Jazakallah khair, bro. Really appreciate you coming. Obviously, the article originally and sending it in and coming and discussing it. So some good takeaway points, some practical advice, some things for our community to think about, reassess our relationship with these devices and this economy and this these markets.
And no clickbait titles when this video goes live.
Okay, I'm thinking of only legit bait ones, inshallah. Yeah. So could you just say a few of these words for the opening montage? But no, Jazakallah khair for coming again, and Jazakallah khair on you for watching. If you like this video, as usual, I'm not going to say give it a like and a share. Don't subscribe. And until next time, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.